Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. Election night 2014, a midterm election for those listening to this broadcast overseas. I appreciate the confusion of this. We do not have a parliamentary system. We have what is called a presidential system. Every 4 years, the presidency leads the top of the ticket for his party and the opponents. Now, the question here in midterms is who benefits and who doesn't benefit. All the House seats are up, and we will address House seats with special reports from Francis Rose of Federal News Radio. He's at my Washington affiliate, WMAL. But the Senate, 1/3 of the Senate is up, and I'm very pleased to be joined in studio. It's a great pleasure. My friend, colleague, and co-host Larry Kudlow of CNBC and Kudlow Radio on the Weekend joining me tonight. Larry, I've done what I can explaining the presidential system. 1/3 of the Senate is up tonight, and the President of the United States earlier today, I believe on Connecticut Radio, a place that you know very well, said this was the worst batch of states to come up for an election. I think he reached back to Noah's time. And so the president was discounting the losses tonight already. Mr. Pryor's been defeated by Tom Cotton, a freshman, the youngest man ever to join the U.S. Senate and the first Iraqi war veteran. And Shelley Moore Capito has filled Jay Rockefeller's empty seat. He's retiring. So the president, is this the worst batch of states ever to come up for the Senate? Larry, good evening to you.
Good evening, John. Thank you for having me. I don't know if it's the worst. Worst is a historical word. A quick point on your Pryor discussion. Pryor lost to Tom Cotton. Both Hillary and Bill Clinton campaigned heavily in Arkansas for Pryor and got nowhere.
0 for 2.
And got nowhere. 0 for 2. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two, it's not a wave election. But I think the issues in New Hampshire and North Carolina are still up for grabs. The Eddie Gillespie, he's running 6 points ahead of Mark Warner, is extraordinary.
This is Virginia, which is a race nobody's watched until tonight.
Right. And I've known Ed Gillespie for I don't know how many years. He helped write the contract with America. He ran, John, a real issues campaign, which, as you know, I tried so hard to get the senators to have a contract with America or a boiled-down version. They wouldn't do it.
What are we going to do when we're elected?
Right, and Gillespie has done that, so clearly it's helped him. And you trump me on the other, you preempt me. That is the question. Okay, I'm going to assume a Republican Senate, and the big question is what are they going to do about it? And my hope is, and what I hear, when I get reports, I've talked to a number of senators, I've talked to a number of leading House members, they're going to get the continuing resolution out of the way in the lame duck Congress, is get that out of the way. And then when they start in the new year, energy and corporate tax reform, the top two issues, corporate tax rate at 20%, no double tax on foreign profits. Regarding energy, the Keystone Pipeline authorization, opening up federal lands to drilling, and ending restrictions on exports. They tell me those are the two top issues, and they want to put bills on the president's desk immediately. If he vetoes them, he vetoes them. Right. But basically, you'll have yourself a campaign issue.
The president has called for a bipartisan meeting in the White House on Friday. We can presume this is for the lame duck session, but all eyes will be on the changes of numbers in the Senate. Right now, there's +2 for the Republicans. We don't have any news that is firm, although I notice South Dakota has just been called for the governors there. So I imagine we're going to see, I'm not seeing my Twitter feed automatically, Larry. You're watching Fox up there on the wall. I imagine we're going to hear South Dakota called for the Republicans.
South Dakota was always, you know.
That's a plus. That's a pickup.
That's a pickup. Montana's a pickup. West Virginia's a pickup. Right. John, let me just add one amendment to my earlier. Here's an issue that may come up right away. I don't know what this Obama meeting is. Maybe he's just going to insult Republicans like he usually does. But if the president chooses by executive order to change the immigration laws, to stop deportations, to allow legalizations, and not to work on border security, if he moves by executive action, all hell is going to break loose in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And you know what? It may even alter the outlook for 2016 if Obama pulls this.
Let's talk about the outlook for 2016, Larry, because all these last weeks I felt that there was a third way, the Republican way, the Democratic way, and the Clinton way. And the Clinton party is in the news tonight. It's just hard to see. You've mentioned the Clintons in Arkansas, but Mrs. Clinton is clearly the go-to backup to the Obama administration's failure to convince the American people that the president's progressive politics are the way America wants to be led. The rejection of the Affordable Care Act is obvious tonight. I understand it was much on the minds of the voters. It remains enormously unpopular. Also, the president's national security is often mentioned. You mentioned immigration. That's part of national security. Certainly, the tragedy at the border last summer, when the young people and children were crashing across the border because they imagined they were going to be accepted. That is part of national security and homeland defense. The war declared by the president September 10th, 2014 against ISIS, that's not much in evidence. And Ebola is part of national security and immigration policy. All of that, in addition to the story of energy policies, which you mention routinely, and tax reform, that all turns to Mrs. Clinton now, Larry. We don't think that the President of the United States has any fresh ideas on this. Mrs. Clinton may or may not. So your measure at this point, are the Democrats who remain after tonight, are they going to be calling the White House, or are they going to be calling the Clintons?
Well, you know, the Democratic Party today is substantially different than it was 20 years ago when Bill Clinton was president and was working with Newt Gingrich. It is a party, John, that has moved significantly to the left, as you know.
Right.
And when Mrs. Clinton went out on the campaign trail, what was it, last week, and said businesses and corporations don't create jobs, minimum wage does.
Right.
Nobody believes that. And then she tried to take it back or backtrack it. She didn't. And it just shows me how far to the left the Democratic has gone. I don't think, seriously, there is such a thing as a Clinton wing of the Democratic Party. Now, if Hillary Clinton wants to reestablish it, if she wants to take her husband's advice on a number of issues that you mentioned, and he gives pretty good advice, if you ask me, fine. But so far, I don't see it. I think she wants to be part of the progressive wing of the party and head off Elizabeth Warren.
I don't want to be too ironic, Larry, but Mrs. Clinton would make a heck of a Republican. She's very able when it comes to national security issues. She has the experience. I do not believe her failures as Secretary of State are entirely hers. What I understand about the Obama foreign policy is that it's made by one man all the time, the President of the United States. That's true with John Kerry right now. I want to turn to tax policy. The Democratic Party doesn't, to my knowledge, have new ideas about tax reform. We believe Mr. McConnell, presuming he leads the Senate, and Mr. Boehner, is assured to lead the House. They're going to talk about tax reform. Is that a conversation the president's ready to have? And does Mrs. Clinton weigh in on this in these next 2 years?
Well, in the next 2 years, she's going to have to weigh in on it. But in the shorter run, you ask about the president. Look, periodically, he pays lip service to corporate tax reform. Periodically, John. Never at any great length. He's too busy bashing corporations and calling them, they're traitors. They're not patriots, okay?
Right.
So that's a real bad indicator. But I believe the Republican Party is going to press forward. What I don't know is whether they will go for corporate tax reform as its own piece, or whether they will want total tax reform to include the personal side. My advice to them, for what it's worth, is that they stick to the business side right now. Stick to the business side, because America is losing jobs, we are losing companies, we are losing cash, we are not competitive. And this is pressing down on this weak economic recovery, which has averaged only 2.3% per year for 5.5 years. Go for the business tax cut. It'll get you where you want. Is Obama serious about that? I do not know.
Larry Kudlow, CNBC and Kudlow Radio on the weekend. And we're going to Francis Rose, my colleague. He's in Washington at WMAL, the nation's capital affiliate of this show. Francis has what we know are surprising numbers from the House races. Francis, a very good evening to you. As we close this segment, have you got any significant upsets or upsets in the making in the House of Representatives? Good evening, Francis.
Good evening, John and Larry. Thank you for having me on the program tonight. The main upset, as it looks right now, is in the 2nd District in Florida. Gwen Graham, the daughter of former Senator Bob Graham, Democrat there, leading Congressman Steve Sutherland, 51-49, 95% of that vote in that race, and that appears to be over. The other race that I've been following here, is the 1st District in New Hampshire. This is Carol Shea Porter, the Democrat, who is running for re-election in a district that was formerly represented represented by Frank Ginta, and that is her opponent tonight. This has swung back and forth, still only about 15% of the vote in that race. But the way the precincts are coming in, that's swinging back and forth, 51-49. For one moment, one candidate, the next moment, the next candidate, and we'll continue to keep an eye on that throughout the night.
Anything from Maine 1 or Massachusetts 6? I've been told to watch those.
Those are races that we'll keep an eye on. What is striking from Maine tonight's the governor's race there, with about 5% in. Governor LePage, who people expected to fall dramatically tonight, leading Mike Michaud there, 47-45. Now, just a few votes in there, but for him to have a lead even of 2 points at this point is surprising a lot of people.
Michaud is the man who gave up his seat, Maine 1, to run for the governorship. Francis Rose in Washington at WMAL. Larry?
Just a quick one on Francis's report that the governor is ahead. I know LePage. He's one tough, ornery son of a gun. Angus King,
right,
senator from Maine, independent, is going to convert to Republicanism.
You mean
you heard it first here?
Wow.
You heard it first.
Wow.
Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Mr. Angus King are going to move to the Republican side.
I'm expecting to see the Politico tweet within moments. Larry Kudlow of CNBC and Kudlow Radio. Francis Rose will be with us throughout the evening to report on the House and gubernatorial races. I can only watch the Senate because it's blaring in my eyes, these Senate turnovers. So far, +2 for the Republicans, and Scott Brown is on the cusp in New Hampshire. We're waiting for a confirmation of how that race is going to go. Larry Kudlow, I'm John Batchelor. We'll be back about Virginia. There's the surprise. This is the John Batchelor Show.